Hello again, Netrunner fans, Willingdon here, and today I'm going to share some of my tips for playing against Jinteki Replicating Perfection. No other deck is capable of creating such strong remote servers that are able to withstand the runner's attack over the critical turns needed to score agendas. Combine this with a very strong and fairly robust economy, as well as a set of ice that's very taxing for the runner to deal with, and you've got a deck that's all about the economy war. Before we look at some examples of tactics that you can use against RP, let's make sure that we understand the way that the ID ability works and the ways that we can play against it. RP is going to force us to make a run on a central server before we're able to make runs against their remotes. Pay particular attention to the fact that we don't have to make a successful run, we just have to make a run in order to satisfy this ability. For this reason, our corporation opponents are going to have to be smart about how they deploy their ice on the central servers. Even though my corporation opponent has lots of really good ice res, there's a major weakness in his board position. Can you see it? Since Eli 1.0 is the outermost piece of ice on R&D, if we want to run and trash his 2 asset remotes, we can just bump into the Eli, let our run end, and then we're going to be able to run those remotes with impunity. For this reason, good RP players try to put some sort of nasty effect ice on their outermost piece. That way, if you run into it to try to gain access to the remotes, you at least have to suffer the consequence of something like Tsurugi. Also keep in mind, if you're looking to gain access to the remotes, you can just encounter the first piece of ice and then jack out. So if we ran against this pup, for example, we could just pay the 2 credits and then just jack out so that we don't have to deal with Crick. Earlier I described Replicating Perfection as a deck focused on the economic war. In this next section, we're going to look at some ways that you can win that war as the runner. My first basic tip is to destroy the economy assets when you can. Without the constant influx of drip economy, it can be difficult for an RP player to afford to res all of their ice. For this reason, we need to prioritize destroying sundews and other asset economy, especially when we access it out of the central servers. If you're facing a lot of RP, it might make sense to include some cards to reduce the cost to trash the stuff, things like Imp or Scrubber. As I just mentioned, the cost of RP ice tends to be pretty high. For this reason, destroying or de-resing their ice is particularly effective. Dealing with their ice in this way is really good on central servers, because then they're going to have to commit more ice to defend something like R&D instead of putting it in front of their asset economy or building a large remote server. Another major point against RP is that it's going to be really taxing to do basically any type of run against them. For this reason, we don't want to spend too many credits making single access runs on the central, especially if it's really expensive to get in. It would be better to focus on using multi-access effects if we're going to be running against the centrals, since we're going to get a much better value out of that taxing run. If you access a central server when you're broke, you're going to be missing a lot of opportunities to trash stuff like Caprice, their asset economy, or to just score their agendas like NAPD or Future Perfect. Also keep in mind when you're being taxed by their ice that if you spin down to broke at the end of a turn, it might be very easy for them to get a scoring window out of that. If you're super broke, you're probably not going to be able to contest a remote, especially with something like Caprice or Ash in it. Since the RP ice is going to extensively tax us, we're going to want to try to maximize our own economy cards to get the best yield out of them possible. For example, if we're playing a prepaid Kate deck, it might make more sense to try to draw into a prepaid before we play our burst economy cards. That way we can get an extra couple credits out of those cards and they'll go just a little bit further. RP generally isn't very fast at winning the game, and really the only threat that we have in the early game is them rushing out a Nisei Mark II. For this reason, we can usually take a little bit longer to set up our economy and our rig before we need to be too aggressive against them. The 2 cards that most often create scoring opportunities for RP are Ashe and Caprice Nisei. Both of these are highly contingent on the economic situation in the game. Ashe is going to require that they have about the same number of credits as you, and that they've created a remote server that you can't just run twice. If you can easily get into the remote, you can just run and trash the Ashe, and then just rerun the server and score whatever's there. Caprice can be a little more difficult to deal with. The easiest way to beat her Cygame effect is to just have the corporation spent broke. For this reason, a lot of players play things like Account Siphon or Vamp to try to suck all the corpse credits away and then just be able to run and trash the Caprice. If your opponent instead plays the Caprice on the HQ to defend against Siphon or Vamp, you're going to be able to get into their scoring remotes easier because they're going to have the Caprice there instead of on the remote. Another easy way to deal with Caprice is to destroy the ice defending her. This will let us rerun her over and over, and we can just spend 0 each time on the Cygame bid. Our corporation opponent is going to have to bid some number of credits to be able to defend her, and that can be really taxing, especially if we've destroyed their economy assets. Beyond just the credit tax of breaking their expensive ice, the RPID ability also puts a click tax on the runner, since we have to spend a click in order to be able to gain access to the remotes. For this reason, effects that gain the runner clicks tend to be pretty effective against RP. If you can include some of these in your deck, it'll definitely help against their ID ability. Even though most RP decks don't play that many damage effects, they are still Jinteki. For this reason, we want to make sure that we don't get flatlined in a game that we could have won otherwise. For the most part, this means we need to avoid stupid damage sentries that could flatline us if we don't have a breaker. It is worth considering Fetal AI, since a fair number of Jinteki decks include 1 or 2 of these as a nasty surprise. Well, I hope some of these suggestions can help improve your game against RP. It's certainly a deck that requires a lot of careful planning and good decision making to be able to defeat, and I think it's really a deck that tests your fundamentals on both sides. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please press subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.